I remember thinking the car felt colder than usual that morning. We were 2 hours into the drive to Lake Haven when I realised they'd forgotten my blanket. Not forgotten. Decided it wasn't important. The trunk was packed so carefully with Emma's camera equipment, Dad's fishing gear, Mum's portable espresso maker. Even Daniel had 3 separate bags for a weekend trip. But my blanket, the one I'd slept with since childhood, the one that helped me through every anxious night, that had been left folded on my bed. "It's just a blanket, Halena," Mum said when I mentioned it at the first rest stop. "You're 24 years old. Surely you can sleep without it for 2 nights. Emma laughed from the front seat. "She still needs her security blanket. That's actually kind of sad." Daniel squeezed my hand, but his smile was apologetic, not supportive. "We'll cuddle extra close," he whispered, like that would fix the tightness in my chest. I pulled my hand away and stared out the window. The mountains rolled past in shades of green and grey. Beautiful, I supposed, but all I could think about was how they'd checked the trunk 3 times to make sure Emma's lenses were secure, how Dad had gone back inside twice for things he'd forgotten, how no one had thought to ask me if I had everything I needed. They never did. The cabin was perfect, of course. Log walls, a stone fireplace, windows that framed the lake like postcards. Emma immediately started photographing everything, her excitement filling every room. Mum unpacked her coffee supplies with the reverence of a ritual. Dad and Daniel bonded over the fishing boat rental, while I stood in the doorway of the bedroom I'd share with Daniel, looking at the thin decorative throw on the bed that would never be enough. "Isn't this amazing?" Daniel wrapped his arms around me from behind. "Your family really outdid themselves." His family, not mine. He'd been dating me for 2 years, but he'd fallen in love with them 6 months in. The way Emma made him laugh with her stories, the way Dad taught him about vintage cars, the way Mum remembered his coffee order without being asked. They adored him, and he adored them back, and I was just the bridge he'd crossed to reach them. "I'm cold," I said. "There's a fireplace downstairs. Come on, let's join everyone." But I meant a different kind of cold. The kind that lives in your bones when you realise you're optional. The kind that settles in your chest when you're surrounded by family and still feel completely alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. The thin throw did nothing against the mountain chill that seeped through the walls. Daniel snored softly beside me, peaceful and warm in a way I could never quite reach. Through the wall, I could hear Emma and Mum talking in the kitchen, their laughter punctuating the quiet. "Helena's always been sensitive," Mum was saying. "Everything is such a big deal with her." "I know," Emma replied. "Remember when she cried? Because we ate her birthday cake a day early? She was 16. 16 and crying over cake." They laughed together, easy and light. They'd never understood that it wasn't about the cake. It was about how they'd gathered around it without me, celebrating something that was supposed to be mine, not even thinking to wait. Just like they hadn't thought about my blanket. Just like they never thought about me unless I was right in front of them, and sometimes not even then. I got up and walked downstairs. The house was dark except for the dying fire. I found an extra jacket in the closet and wrapped myself in it, curling up on the couch. It smelled like cedar and strangers. I closed my eyes and tried to remember what warmth felt like. "Can't sleep?" I opened my eyes to find Dad standing in the doorway, his reading glasses perched on his head. "Just cold," I said. He nodded and sat in the armchair across from me. For a moment, I thought he might ask why I was really awake, might notice the way my shoulders were rigid with tension, might see that his daughter was breaking apart in slow motion. "Emma's photographs are going to be stunning," he said instead. "She has such an eye for beauty. We're lucky to have her talent in the family." "Yeah," I said. "Lucky." He smiled, missing everything beneath the word, and returned upstairs. I stayed on the couch until sunrise painted the lake gold and pink. My body ached. My eyes burned. But mostly I felt empty. like I'd poured myself out trying to matter to people who would never notice the difference. The weekend passed in fractured moments. Emma's photo shoot by the lake, where everyone posed for her camera except me because I wasn't feeling photogenic. Daniel's fishing trip with Dad, where they talked about sports and business and all the things that men bond over. Mum's elaborate breakfast spread that she and Emma prepared together, laughing in the kitchen like best friends while I set the table in silence. I was there, but I wasn't. I existed in the peripheral vision of their happiness. On the last day, we hiked to a waterfall that Emma had researched. The trail was steep and rocky, and I fell behind within the first mile. My chest felt tight, anxiety mixing with the thin mountain air, and my legs trembled with exhaustion. But they kept walking, their voices fading ahead of me. Daniel turned back once, halfway up. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Go ahead." He hesitated for exactly 3 seconds before Emma called his name, and then he was gone. I sat on a boulder beside the trail and looked at the valley below. Everything was so green, so alive, so indifferent to my suffering. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen, thinking about calling someone, but there was no one to call. My friends were Emma's friends first. My life was braided so tightly with theirs that I couldn't tell where I ended and they began. I thought about just staying there, about letting them finish their hike, and their perfect photographs, and their beautiful family memory without me. Would they even notice I was gone? Would it take an hour, 2? Would Emma check her photos that night and realise I wasn't in a single frame? But I stood up eventually. I always did. I climbed the rest of the trail in silence, arrived at the waterfall to find them already taking photos, and smiled when Daniel put his arm around me and said, "You made it!" like it was an accomplishment, like I was a child who'd completed a difficult task. The drive home felt longer than the drive there. I sat in the back seat again, pressed against the window, watching the mountains disappear behind us. Emma showed Mum her favourite photos, hundreds of them, each one a perfect moment I hadn't been part of. Daniel dozed with his head against my shoulder, heavy and trusting. "We should make this an annual thing," Dad said, "a family tradition." "Absolutely," Mum agreed. "Though next time, we'll need to plan better. I forgot to pack Emma's good hiking boots." No one mentioned the blanket. No one mentioned me. When we pulled into the driveway, I felt something inside me go quiet. Not calm, quiet like a candle flame right before it dies. I helped unload the car with mechanical efficiency, my body moving while my mind drifted somewhere else. Emma hugged me goodbye and promised to send me the photos. Daniel kissed my forehead and said he'd call me tomorrow. I went upstairs to my childhood bedroom and saw my blanket exactly where I'd left it, folded at the foot of the bed. I picked it up and held it against my chest, and something cracked inside me. It wasn't the blanket. It had never been about the blanket. It was about being the person everyone forgot, the person whose needs were negotiable, the person who could be left behind and no one would slow down. I don't remember making the decision. I just remember the quiet. I remember thinking that maybe if I wasn't here, they'd finally see me. Maybe absence would do what presence never could. Maybe they'd realise too late that I'd been slowly disappearing all along, and they'd never even looked. The bottle of pills was in the bathroom cabinet. Prescription anxiety medication I'd been taking for years. Necessary, Mum always said, because I was too sensitive. Because I couldn't handle normal stress, because something was wrong with me instead of wrong with how they treated me. I sat on the bathroom floor with the bottle in my hands. The tiles were cold against my legs. The house was quiet. Emma had her own apartment now, Mum and Dad. Dad were downstairs watching television, and the world continued without any awareness that I was breaking. I thought about Daniel, about how he'd cry at my funeral and mean it, but also how he'd let my family comfort him, and how they'd all grieve together, and how even my death would become something they shared without me. I thought about Emma's photographs, how she'd probably create some artistic memorial, black and white and beautiful, and everyone would praise her for turning tragedy into art. I thought about my parents, how they'd wonder what they'd missed, but only for a little while because eventually they'd convinced themselves there was nothing they could have done. I unscrewed the cap. The bathroom light hummed above me, fluorescent and harsh. I looked at my reflection in the chrome of the faucet, distorted, unrecognisable. Maybe that was fitting. I'd been distorted and unrecognisable for years, shrinking myself to fit into the negative space they left for me. I took the first pill, then the second. Then I stopped counting. The world went soft around the edges. My breathing slowed. The cold tiles became almost comfortable. I thought about my blanket one last time, about all the nights it had held me together when nothing else could, and then I thought about nothing at all. The darkness came gently, like finally being allowed to rest. I woke up to sunlight streaming through my childhood bedroom window. My first thought was confusion. My second was disappointment. My third was rage, judgmental, pure and clarifying. But then I saw the date on my phone. 3 years earlier. The summer before I'd met Daniel. The year before Emma's photography career took off. The moment when everything had started its slow descent into the weekend that would end me. I sat up slowly, my body young and strong and alive. My blanket was tangled around my legs. I could hear Mum and Emma laughing downstairs about something, their voices light and carefree. Dad's car pulled into the driveway, home from work, right on time. I knew this day. This was the day Daniel would come to fix our internet, the day he'd smile at me and ask me to dinner, the day I'd say yes because I'd been lonely and he'd been kind, and I'd thought maybe someone could actually see me. This was the day everything had started. And this time, I was going to make different choices. I got out of bed and opened my closet. My clothes from 3 years ago looked young and uncertain, picked to please other people, to fade into the background to take up less space. I pushed them aside and pulled out jeans and a simple black shirt, something that felt like armour instead of apology. Downstairs, Mom was making coffee while Emma edited photos on her laptop at the kitchen table. "Morning, sweetheart," Mum said without looking up. "There's breakfast in the pan if you want it." "No, thanks," I said. "I'm going out." Emma glanced at me. "Where?" "Does it matter?" The edge in my voice made them both look up. I saw their surprise, their confusion. Good, let them be confused. Let them wonder. "I just thought we could hang out today," Emma said. "Maybe go to the mall. I needed your opinion on some frames for my prints." "Ask Mum." But I said no, Emma. I walked out before she could respond. Behind me, I heard Mum say something about me being moody lately, and Emma's agreeing. Murmur. Let them think what they wanted. I was done performing the role of the accommodating daughter, the flexible sister, the person who bent until she broke. I drove to the coffee shop downtown, the one I'd loved but had stopped going to because Emma said their lattes were too expensive. I ordered the most elaborate drink on the menu, found a corner table and opened my laptop. For years, I talked about taking online courses, learning graphic design, building skills that might lead to a career I actually cared about. But there had never been time. Emma had needed help with her portfolio. Mum had needed help planning parties. Daniel had needed emotional support through his job stress. My life had been consumed by being useful to people who would forget me the moment I stopped serving their needs. Not anymore. I enrolled in 3 courses: web design, digital illustration, and creative writing. I paid the fees without asking anyone's permission or opinion. Then, I blocked out time in my calendar, hours that belonged only to me, hours I would protect fiercely. When I got home that evening, Daniel's van was in the driveway. I remembered this moment too. Mum had called about the internet being slow. He was in the living room with his toolkit, and when I walked in, he looked up and smiled that warm, genuine smile that had disarmed me the first time. "You must be Halena," he said. "Your mum's told me about you." "I'm sure she has," I said, and kept walking. I heard his surprise in the silence that followed, but I didn't turn around. I went upstairs, closed my door, and opened my laptop. I had work to do. An hour later, Emma knocked. "Daniel asked if you wanted to get dinner with him." "No." "Halena, he's really nice and cute. You should at least—" "I'm not interested, Emma." "Why are you being like this?" I looked at her, really looked at her. My sister, who I'd loved so desperately, I'd almost destroyed myself trying to earn a fraction of the attention she received without effort. She looked concerned now, but only because my behaviour was unexpected. She'd never noticed when I was dying slowly. She only noticed when I refused to play my assigned part. "I'm being like myself," I said. "Maybe you just never paid attention before." She left, confused and a little hurt. I felt nothing. The girl who would have apologised, who would have soothed her feelings and made myself smaller to restore peace. That girl had died on a bathroom floor. This version of me knew better. The weeks passed in strange, liberating increments. I declined family dinners when I had coursework. I stopped answering Emma's texts immediately, stopped dropping everything to help her with projects. When Mum asked me to help plan her book club event, I said no without explanation or apology. "Are you okay?" Mum asked after the third no. "You seem distant." "I'm fine," I said. "I'm just busy." "Busy with what?" "My own life." The words hung in the air like something revolutionary. My own life, not the supporting role in theirs, not the bit part in Emma's story or the emotional caretaker for Mum or the audience for Dad's achievements. Mine. I watched them struggle to understand this new version of me. Emma tried to draw me back with invitations and compliments. Mum oscillated between concern and irritation. Dad barely noticed until Mum pointed it out, and even then, his attention was fleeting. But I didn't need them to understand. I just needed them to adapt. 3 months after my rebirth, Emma announced she'd been invited to showcase her work at a local gallery. It was a big deal, her first real break. Mum immediately started planning a celebration dinner. "Saturday night," Mum said. "We'll go to Marcello's. Everyone will be there." "I can't make it," I said. Emma's face fell. "What? Why not?" "I have plans." "What plans could be more important than this?" I looked at her across the kitchen table. 3 years from now, she'd be photographing a family trip where I didn't exist in a single frame. She'd laugh with Mum about my sensitivity. She'd consume all the space and air and attention, and I'd be slowly suffocating in the margins. "My plans," I said. "That's all you need to know." "Halena, this is Emma's big night," Mum said, her voice sharpening. "Family shows up for each other." "Do they?" I met her eyes. "That's good to know." I left the table before the argument could escalate. In my room, I pulled out my blanket and wrapped it around my shoulders. It felt different now. Not like security, but like a reminder. A witness to all the nights I'd needed comfort because they'd made me feel invisible. I didn't go to Emma's gallery show. Instead, I finished a major project for my web design course and submitted it hours early. Then I drove to the lake. Not Lake Haven, a different one, and sat by the water until the stars came out. The silence was profound, peaceful, mine. When I got home, the house was dark except for the porch light. I found a note on the kitchen counter in Mum's handwriting. "We missed you tonight. Emma was hurt. Please call her." I crumpled the note and threw it away. Emma called the next morning, her voice tight with tears. "How could you miss it?" "I had other things to do." "More important than supporting your sister?" "Emma, do you even know what courses I'm taking, what I'm working on, what I want to do with my life?" Silence. Do you know my favourite book? My favourite movie? What keeps me up at night? More silence. You don't, I said quietly, because you've never asked. None of you have. So don't talk to me about support when you've never once shown up for me. That's not fair. It's absolutely fair. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not with fear, with relief, with the pure, clean feeling of finally telling the truth. A year passed, then another. I completed my courses and started freelancing as a web designer. My client list grew steadily. I moved into my own apartment, small but mine, decorated exactly how I wanted, filled with things that made me happy instead of things that made me acceptable. Emma's career flourished. She travelled for photo shoots, won small awards, built an impressive portfolio. She sent me updates occasionally, long texts full of her achievements and excitement. I responded with brief congratulations, nothing more. Mum tried to bridge the distance with lunch invitations and phone calls. I accepted some, declined others. When we did meet, she talked about Emma's success and Dad's work and her book club friends, occasionally remembering to ask about my life like an afterthought. Your website work is nice, she said once, in a tone that suggested she didn't quite understand what I did or why it mattered. It pays my bills and makes me happy, I said. That's enough. But don't you want more? A real career? A relationship? I have a career, and I'm fine alone. You can't be alone forever, Halena. I've been alone my whole life. Mum, I'm just finally comfortable with it. She looked hurt by that, and some small part of me, the part that had loved her desperately, that had begged silently for her to see me, felt a flicker of guilt. But I let it pass. Truth wasn't cruelty. Truth was just truth, and they needed to hear it for years. The invitation came on a Tuesday afternoon. Emma was planning a family trip to Lake Haven. She'd rented the same cabin, wanted to recreate the trip for a photography project about family and time and togetherness. Please come, she wrote. It won't be the same without you. We haven't all been together in so long. I stared at the message for a long time. This was the trip. The one where they'd forget my blanket, forget my needs, forget me. The one that would lead to Daniel and the slow erosion of my self-worth, and eventually to that bathroom floor. I deleted the message without responding. Emma called an hour later. Did you get my text? I did. And? I'm not coming. Why not? We're family, we should... Emma, do you remember the last time we took that trip? Silence. Of course she didn't remember. It hadn't happened yet for her, but I remembered. I remembered everything. You took hundreds of photographs, I said. Beautiful ones. I've seen them. And I wasn't in a single frame. Not one. Do you know what that feels like? To exist so completely outside your family's perception that you literally disappear from the visual record. I don't understand. We haven't taken that trip yet. No, I said. We haven't, and we won't. Not together. You're not making sense. I'm making perfect sense. You're just not listening. But that's nothing new. I hung up before she could respond. Then I booked my own trip. A solo hiking adventure in the Cascades. Something I'd always wanted to do but had never suggested because I knew they'd either talk me out of it or turn it into a group activity that would cease to be about what I wanted. I packed light, clothes, supplies, a small first aid kit, and, at the bottom of my bag, carefully folded, my blanket. Not because I needed it for security, because I wanted it, because it was mine, and I'd learned to value the things that belonged to me. The mountains were exactly as beautiful as I'd imagined. The trails were challenging, but manageable. The silence was comprehensive. No voices except my own thoughts, no obligations except to myself. I took photographs on my phone, not for anyone else, just for me. evidence that I existed, that I took up space, that I mattered enough to document my own experience. On the third night, I sat by my campfire wrapped in my blanket and thought about them. They were probably at Lake Haven right now, Emma taking her photos, Mum and Dad admiring the view. Maybe they'd noticed my absence. Maybe they'd said something about it. Maybe they'd realised, finally, that the space I'd left behind was significant. Or maybe they hadn't. Maybe Emma's photographs would be beautiful and complete without me. Maybe they'd have a wonderful time and return home with perfect memories. Maybe my absence would teach them nothing. It didn't matter anymore. I pulled out my phone and drafted a message to the family group chat. I hope you're having a good trip. I'm having a good trip too. Mine is just different from yours, and that's okay. I'm learning that I don't need to be part of every family moment to be valuable. I don't need to chase your attention to deserve love. I'm enough on my own. I hope someday you understand that. But even if you don't, I'll be fine. I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. They didn't need my explanation. This wasn't about making them understand. This was about me understanding myself. The fire crackled softly. Above me, stars scattered across the sky like someone had spilled diamonds. The night air was cool, but not cold. I was wrapped in my blanket, alone in the wilderness, and I had never felt more at peace. I returned home to 17 missed calls and dozens of texts. Emma's ranged from worried to angry to hurt. Mum's were mostly concerned. Dad's were characteristically brief. Call when you can. I made coffee in my quiet apartment and read through them all without feeling the old panic, the old desperate need to fix things and apologise and make everything okay. They'd survived my absence, they'd had their trip, and I'd had mine. Emma showed up at my door 2 days later. I saw her through the peephole, hesitated, then opened it. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She looked around my apartment like she was seeing it for the first time, even though she'd been here before, but maybe she was seeing it differently now. Seeing me differently. "You really went alone," she said finally. I did. Mom was worried. Dad didn't know what to say. I was, what? Hurt and confused. And then I looked through my photos from the trip and I realised something. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through images. The cabin, the lake, the trails, the waterfall, Mum and Dad smiling, sunset over the water, the dock. "You're right," she said quietly. "You weren't in any of them. Not just this trip, any of them. I went through my entire portfolio, years of family photos, and you're barely there. And when you are, you look invisible." "Sad," she said. "You look so sad, and I never saw it." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that I hadn't already said in a dozen different ways they'd never heard. "I'm sorry," Emma said, "for not seeing you, for taking up all the space, for making you feel like you didn't matter." The apology landed differently than I'd expected. I'd imagined this moment in the before time, imagined them finally understanding, finally apologising. I'd thought it would feel like vindication, like victory. Instead, it just felt quiet. A simple acknowledgement of something that should have been obvious all along. "Thank you," I said. "Is there any way to fix this? To make it better?" I thought about it. About whether I wanted to rebuild something with them. Whether the family I'd once desperately loved was worth the effort of resurrection. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Maybe. But it would have to be different. You'd have to see me, all of you, not as Emma's quiet sister, or the sensitive daughter, or the person who's always available when you need her, as myself, as Halena, and I'm not sure you know how to do that. I want to learn. Wanting isn't enough. It's about actually doing it, consistently, without me having to remind you or beg for it. She nodded slowly. I understand. After she left, I sat by my window and looked out at the city. People moved through their lives below, walking dogs, hailing cabs, carrying groceries. Everyone with their own story, their own struggles, their own journey toward becoming whoever they needed to be. I thought about the girl who'd sat on a bathroom floor with a bottle of pills. The girl who'd believed her absence was the only way to be seen. She'd been so lost, so desperate, so certain that she was the problem. But she'd been wrong. The problem wasn't her sensitivity or her needs or her existence. The problem was people who'd forgotten to see her and her belief that she couldn't exist without their validation. That girl was gone now, dead and reborn, and this version, this Halena who packed a light and travelled alone, who built a life on her own terms, who valued her own company, she was stronger than anyone had ever given her credit for. My phone buzzed. Daniel. Not the Daniel I'd dated, but the one I'd dismissed 2 years ago when he'd asked me to dinner. He'd sent a friend request on a professional networking site with a message. Saw your portfolio. Really impressive work. Would love to grab coffee and talk about a potential collaboration. I smiled. In another timeline, I'd have said yes immediately, desperate for connection. I'd have turned that coffee into a relationship, that relationship into another way to lose myself. But this, Halena, knew better. I declined the request politely. I had work to do, mountains to climb, a life to build. I had learned to travel light and move forward without carrying anyone else's expectations. I had learned that the blanket I'd once needed for security was just a blanket. Comfort was something I could create for myself. The next morning, Mum called. Emma told me about your conversation, she said. Okay. I've been thinking about it. About you, about how we... She paused, searching for words. How I didn't realise what I was missing. What were you missing? You, my daughter. Not the version I assumed you were, but who you actually are. I'd like to know her, if you're willing to let me. I closed my eyes. This was what I'd wanted for so long. To be seen, to matter, to have them recognise that I existed beyond their peripheral vision. But I'd also learned to live without it. I'd built a life that didn't depend on their attention, and that made all the difference. Maybe, I said. We could try, but slowly, and only if you're really ready to do the work. I am, she said. I promise I am. Time would tell if she meant it. Time would tell if any of them could change. But either way, I'd be fine. I'd learned how to be fine on my own. I went to my closet and pulled out my blanket. It was worn now, faded from years of use. I held it for a moment, feeling its familiar weight, remembering all the nights it had been my only comfort. Then I folded it carefully and placed it on the shelf. Not thrown away, I still loved it, still honoured what it had meant to me. But I didn't need to carry it everywhere anymore. I didn't need to wrap myself in it every night to feel safe. I'd learned to carry warmth inside myself. I'd learned that security came from self-knowledge, not objects. I'd learned to pack light and travel alone, and in that solitude, I'd found something more valuable than their attention. I'd found myself. The sun was setting outside my window, painting the city in shades of amber and rose. I made tea and sat in my favourite chair with a book I'd been meaning to read. No phone, no obligations, no one needing me to be anything other than exactly who I was. Tomorrow, I'd work on my latest client project. Next week, I'd start planning another solo trip. Next month, maybe I'd accept Mum's invitation to lunch. Or maybe I wouldn't. The choice was mine, and that freedom was everything. I died once in desperation, believing I was worthless. I'd been reborn into clarity, understanding my worth. And now I was living deliberately, consciously, wholly myself. They'd forgotten my blanket once, in another life. It had seemed like the ultimate symbol of their negligence, proof that I didn't matter. But they'd done me a favour, really. They'd shown me what I needed to learn, that I could survive without their warmth, without their attention, without their approval, that I could pack light, travel alone, and still arrive exactly where I needed to be. And where I needed to be was here, in this quiet apartment, in this intentional life, wrapped not in fabric, but in the certainty that I was enough. The family group chat buzzed with activity, plans for next month's dinner, questions about the holidays, Emma sharing a new photo. I read through the messages without the old anxiety, without the desperate need to respond immediately and prove I was part of things. I'd respond later, or maybe I wouldn't. Either way, I'd be fine. I was always going to be fine, because I'd learnt the most important lesson of all. The only person I needed to remember me, to see me, to value me, was myself. And I would never forget again.